Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Science Outreach Athabasca event. This talk will be recorded and posted onto our Science Outreach website and YouTube channel. Thanks, Roland, for doing this talk for Science Outreach, and some of the other upcoming talks we will be hosting. February 23rd, where we will have crustaceans more than lobsters, crabs, and shrimps with Dr. Robert Holmberg. In March, we will be having another talk, Myths and Misconceptions in Science, with Dr. Farouk Al-Shamali. And in April, we will be having the last of our speakers for the spring season, and that'll be amphibians in our midst.
There's 71 participants. So
with Dr. Dana Shock. And the dates will be updated for the ones that I didn't give you dates yet.
You have to get permission or something.
So the dates will be updated on our Science Outreach website, and anyone can feel free to post questions in the online chat or ask questions at the end of the presentation by unmuting your audio. So if anyone that's watching this, you can let me know if there's more than one person. I posted that into the chat already. If you have more than one person logged in at your computer, so that way we can keep track of numbers for our own records. And now I will turn things over to Wayne Brio, who's one of our Science Outreach volunteers, and he will be introducing Roland Treu and moderating this talk. Thanks.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Roland Treu, who is an associate professor at AU and joined in 2008. He's conducted several mushroom identification gatherings and talks at AU and Long Lake, and often accompanied with sampling. There will be no sampling tonight unless you really want to virtually. Roland's also an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta, and his background, he obtained a master's degree and a doctoral degree from the University of Munich in Germany. And previous positions, he was a postdoc at Virginia Tech and higher scientific officer at the International Mycological Institute in Egham, UK, and a senior lecturer at the University of Goroka in Papua New Guinea. That's easy for me to say. His research interests are in fungi, as you might expect, mushrooms and their ecology, and in applied mycology, which I suspect is part of the talk tonight. So as Linda said, you can type questions into chat when you think of them, or wait until the end and then I'll call for questions and have Roland respond. I understand that it's obligatory introducing a mycologist that I remind you that he's also a fungi, but that's become a cliche, so I won't do it. So Roland, please, on with the talk.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for the kind introduction, and hi, everyone. I just want to do a quick sound test again. Can you just confirm that you guys can all hear me well?
I do.
Yes, good, good, sounds good.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Sounds good, thank you so much. Okay, so I want to start this talk with a disclaimer. And if you have only a little time, you just have to read the first sentence here and then you are fine. So never eat any mushrooms that you cannot identify 100%. I'll come back to that again and again. Secondly, this presentation is not intended as medical advice because I'm not a medical professional, and it's not advice for diagnosis and treatment of mushroom poisonings. Although I will give a lot of advice on this, but it's not meant as a medical advice. With that, let's just do a quick breakdown of the 50 minutes that I want to restrict myself tonight. So I want to start with setting the stage because we are talking about the dark side of mushrooms, but you shouldn't get the impression that that's the predominant side. In fact, mushrooms are more or less have a much bigger bright side than the dark side. So I will start setting the stage looking at the bright side. Then moving on to some basic toxicology, the science of toxins. And before I come to my main topic, which is mushroom toxins, we briefly talk about mycotoxins and the ergot fungus, which are not mushrooms, but they are fungi. And I will conclude the talk with a few notes about heavy metals in mushrooms and also poisonings with edible mushrooms. Okay, setting the stage. Mushrooms are a health food and they are gourmet food. Mushrooms are a source of medicines and mushrooms can provide a source of income. So we are at the bright side now. So let's look at that. Nutritional values. So mushrooms have quite a good amount of proteins and they have many vitamins, minerals, very low fat content, caloric value is very low. So they are not only a gourmet food, well tasting, they are also a health food, and that's more and more recognized in the communities. So putting some meat to the bones, mushrooms contain about 20 to 35% of proteins in the dry matter. So if you take the water out, you get the dry matter. And that's a substantial amount. All 9 essential amino acids are in mushrooms. Fat content is very low, as I mentioned. Riboflavin, niacin, and folic acids are vitamins that all mushrooms have. Mushrooms contain potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, zinc, and copper. Their sodium content is very low. So this all points to very healthy food. They're a good source of dietary fibers and they contain many antioxidants. Now, what I was presenting you on this slide is kind of the lowest common denominator because there's many mushroom individual species that have way more vitamins. Some have vitamin D, some have even vitamin C. And so this is just what they all have in common. And then there's some extra ones that do much more. So much for the nutritional facts. Mushrooms can be provide a source of a modest income. And here I have, I'm showing you the Italian white truffle, Tuber magnatum. I'm using that species because that's the most expensive one. So how much do they cost? So I checked the truffle price only a few days ago. The average price for 1 kilogram of Italian white truffle is it's close to 10,000 Canadian dollars. And if you're on a smaller income, you might choose the winter black truffle, which you get already for $4,000 per kilo. Of course, those two are the top ones. There's a number of truffles that are not that expensive, but it gives you an idea. Still on the topic of valuable mushrooms, we also have the caterpillar fungus, which is not only valuable, but is also a source of medicines. What you see here, and I'm using my mouse cursor here, this part here, that brown part on the right, is actually a dead caterpillar, and which serves a really good purpose. And what's growing out of it is the caterpillar fungus, Cordyceps sinensis. So move over truffles. Prices for caterpillar fungus peaked in 2013 at about 58,000 Canadian dollars. However, they have gone down significantly. About 10% of the economic output in Tibet is related to caterpillar fungi. And on this screenshot, I have a newspaper clipping from the Global Times where they complain, this is 2016, they complain that the caterpillar fungus is no longer worth its weight in gold. So in other words, gold is now more expensive than the caterpillar fungus. Here you see the Tibetans actually crawling and looking for the caterpillar fungus. And now to the dark side. So we start with some basic toxicology, and toxins are defined as harmful substances that are produced by organisms. That's how you define toxins as opposed to poisons. So all toxins are poisons, but not all poisons are toxins, because if you take a substance like say mercury, that's a poison, but it's not a toxin because it's not produced by an organism. The gentleman on the right is considered as the father of modern toxicology. He called himself Paracelsus, hailing from Switzerland, but his real name was Theophrast von Hohenheim. And the sentence below, everything is poisonous and nothing is without poison, only the dose makes a thing not poisonous. That quotation from Paracelsus is, no matter where you are around the world, when you study toxicology, that's the very first thing you learn and hear, that sentence by Paracelsus. Simplification, the dose makes a poison. Well, this has two implications. One is, of course, a good thing can also become a poison if the dose is too high. And I'm sure many in our audience know that if you have to take a medication and you overdose, then it turns into a poison. On the bright side, however, the many poisons can also do good if you reduce the dose. So, and we'll come back to that a bit later. So the first group we are looking at are the mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are defined as natural occurring toxins produced by certain molds, fungi, and can be found in food. So we are not yet at the mushrooms. We are molds are fungi, but they are not mushrooms. And I'm using only one example, the so-called aflatoxins. There's many more mycotoxins than aflatoxins. We talk about aflatoxins. The name comes from Aspergillus flavus. This is actually the mold that you see on this picture here. I'm not allowed to grow that mold in my lab. I would need a permit to actually grow this Aspergillus flavus in my lab, because it's pretty bad stuff. It produces these aflatoxins that seriously impact humans and also livestock. They were only discovered in the 60s. The so-called turkey X disease in the UK involved about 100,000 turkeys at least that suddenly died. And there was a huge investigation, and they traced it down to imported feed, turkey feed that had been contaminated with mycotoxins. It was derived from peanuts. The peanuts had aflatoxin. They had aspergillus growing on it, and so the feed they produced was basically so lethal that the turkeys died. And then from then on, people became much more aware. For the World Health Organization, mycotoxins are a big issue, so they are very active on that in that respect. especially nuts and grains are affected. If you ever eat nuts in the shell, make sure that whatever is inside is not moldy. If you find any moldy ones, really throw them away. Acute poisoning happens rarely and may result in liver damage. In other words, you eat so many that you get the immediate damage. However, aflatoxins are strong carcinogens, and long-term exposure is what people are really worried about, and they always result in liver cancer. So that's pretty bad. And finally, these aflatoxins may cause birth defects in children. That's not actually the evidence is there, but it's not yet well established. But we know that they cause mutations in mice, so it's pretty bad stuff anyway. And that's the aflatoxin structure. So I'm from time to time I'm throwing these structural formula at you, and you don't have to understand them, but I will make some comments about them because sometimes when you look at the structure, you can actually draw conclusions. So we are talking about a second fungus, which is ergot fungus, and this is still not a mushroom. It's a fungus, not a mushroom. And this ergot fungus you can easily find around here. For example, if most of you are probably from Athabasca, if you walk on the Muskie Creek Trail in late fall, you will see that many of the grasses after flowering, after seeding, they actually have these little black sclerotia, and you can see that one here. And those those sclerotia are actually the source of this ergot, and they're not only growing on regular grasses, they are also growing on all kinds of grain, especially on rye. And so therefore they have been milled with the flour, and as a result the flour became contaminated, and that's what led to serious outbreaks of disease throughout the Middle Ages. This has been going on for centuries. And the term, so now it's getting really dark, the term St. Anthony's fire was used for these outbreaks, and eventually it was found out that they are connected to this ergot fungus, and they cause madness, hallucinations, gangrene, and it may have played a role also in the Salem witch trials, because the hallucinogenic effects of this fungus may have made some people think that things are happening that didn't really happen. So ergotamine is the active substance, and this ergotamine has the effect that it contracts small muscle fibers and also arteries. So if you narrow your arteries, you restrict blood flow, and that's when this gangrene results. If you look at any medical book from the Middle Ages and from centuries ago, gangrene, St. Anthony's fires was regularly featured here. So it's not fun. And the symptoms, gangrene, extreme pain, hallucinations. So this was a very serious issue in the past. And on this picture, you see a depiction of St. Anthony as he is tempted. This is by the famous Hieronymus Bosch, So you can see who gave name to St. Anthony's fire. One of the observations was that it also triggered abortions in pregnant women. And so here, already in the 1500s, it was found out that ergot and ergotamine can be used to induce labor. And has been used for centuries actually afterwards. And then in 1951, there was a final mass poisoning, the last one I'm aware of about 250 people in France. And the ergotamine is no longer used to induce labor because its dosage is always a problem, but it's now used for very severe cases when you have severe migraine and cluster headaches. You still might be able to use a combination of caffeine and ergotamine to cure that. So this comes back to what I mentioned in the toxicology part. A bad thing, a poison, when you reduce the dose, you might actually get a really useful medication. So I thought if we come back to that 1951 mass poisoning, the last one in France, I thought that was the end of the story. I always assumed it's well established, but I found this other BBC item from 2010, where somebody has written a book about the fact that it may not have been ergotamine, it might have been LSD, and they suspected the CIA, and they received the information from some freedom of information sources. And is that credible? Well, and that brings me back to what I said about structural formula. If you look at the LSD here, the main part of the LSD molecule is that combination of 4 rings here. And if you look at that on the ergotamine, you can see that's almost identical. And in fact, you can synthesize LSD from ergotamine pretty well if you have some chemical skills. And all you have to do is you have to cut off this part and then add a few things here, and then you can synthesize LSD. I don't think I'm even supposed to talk about these things, but I'm not a chemist, so I guess I can. So now to our main topic, fungal poisons. So I'm talking about amatoxins, orellanins, muscarine, hypotonic acid, of course, and the fly gyrometrins, and psilocybin. And don't consider this list as exhaustive. These are only the most important ones. There's way more different types of fungal poisons than what I'm offering here, but I'm still committed to 50 minutes, so I have to make a selection. Before we start, this is something from what I have experienced. If you're a mycologist, sometimes you're approached by people who have experienced poisonings, or in some cases by law enforcement, because sometimes people use poisonous mushrooms to poison other people. So it does happen, and then we come in. So the main recommendations that we have are inquire about the incubation period. That's very important when you have a fungal poisoning. The time between eating the meal and when the first symptoms are coming. I'm coming back to this again and again. It's very important. And of course, you want to secure leftovers from the meal and if necessary, also from the stomach content if you don't know what poisonous fungus a person has eaten. So I'm starting with the death caps because probably at least 90% of all poisonings and also deadly poisonings are caused by the death caps. The most common one is the one on the left, the green one, the green death cap. Very, very characteristic. So it's hard to understand why people confuse it, but I'm talking it as a mycologist. What you have is you have the gill on the underside, you have a very distinct ring, and you have this vulva, and you see that one here as well. So that combination immediately tells you that you are in that group. It's not that easy to tell from those guys because they are still young, but those are really the worst ones. And the green death cap probably 3 or 4 decades ago arrived in Vancouver from Europe, possibly through tree seedlings because it's a mycorrhizal fungus. And so they were brought over from Europe, and now it's spreading in BC quite well, and they find it in more and more sites, and there's more and more reports about poisoning. So this is associated with oaks. It's probably not coming up as far north as we are, but it's on the move for sure. The active principles are the so-called amatoxins, and there's amanitins and phytotoxins that result in severe liver damage. The average incubation period is about 10 hours. So here we go again, incubation period. That's usually bad news. So you eat the mushroom now and you feel fine for about 10 hours, and only then the symptoms occur. That's always bad news. So the longer the incubation period is, the worse it is for from the medical standpoint. Early medical intervention is crucial. Well, that's easier said than done because you only find out about that time period. And so some people have received liver transplants if after severe poisoning. But they can be fatal. Many people have died from them. Typically, symptoms are severe gastrointestinal pain, diarrhea, and then you usually come to a remission where you feel good again, and then you go into the final terminal phase with gastrointestinal pain and progressive liver damage. So it's pretty bad stuff. And as I said, almost all poisonings are bad poisonings are from these death caps. Back to the structure now. For a chemist, this is probably pretty weird-looking molecule because both the phalloidins, the phytotoxins, and the other group as well, they are oligopeptides. It's basically in this case 7 amino acids that form a bicyclic ring, and so you have 2 circles here, and so they are closed. It's not a linear structure, and they inhibit RNA polymerase. I come back to that. The other group is actually the more important one, the amanitin. They are again bicyclic, but they are octapeptides. It means they consist of 7 amino acids. Again, inhibition of RNA polymerase. How does that work? What does that mean? At this slide, you see that big molecule that you see here is RNA polymerase. It's basically the molecule, the enzyme that makes RNA. You've heard about RNA. ad nauseum recently, our little friends, the COVID virus has RNA as its genetic information instead of DNA. And you also heard about the fact that the modern vaccines that we are likely to get also contain RNA. So the RNA molecule is one that makes, the RNA polymerase molecule is one that makes RNA out of DNA. And that red molecule in the center is actually our amatoxin. And that amatoxin binds to that polymerase. And once it has bound to the polymerase, it inactivates it. This is the so-called active center where the or active site where the substrate is actually docking the DNA. So this is now inactivated. The whole thing is inactivated by that amatoxin. If the RNA polymerase can no longer make RNA, it means the next step cannot happen. Either the cell can no longer make proteins and then the cell dies. So that's how these amatoxins work. But what they affect is really the liver. Not only death capes, also Galerina, that's another species that contains amatoxins. And I've always been looking for these things, and usually I find 1 or 2 fruit bodies every year. And I always wanted a good collection. So about 2 years ago, Canadian Tire had them on sale. And then of course, I bought this pot immediately. And now I have a good collection. And I think they may have sold the tree actually rather than the Galerina, but I took it anyway. I just want to come back to my mantra: never eat mushrooms that you can identify 100%. Every year I collect this fungus on the left side. This is Cuneromyces, or sheathed wood tuft. Excellent mushroom for soups, or I have a bunch dried at home. Compared with this one, this is the one I just showed you, the Galerina marginata, deadly poisonous with amanitin. So you can see that unless you really know about mushrooms, you should not collect them. Even if you suspect something is really good, it might not be. So this excellent, the one on the left, excellent to eat. This one could kill you if you eat the whole pot, it probably kills you. So we come to another group, which are the web caps, Cotinerius. And Cotinerius is a huge group. There's actually some edible mushrooms among those. But in that group that I'm showing you here, the section Orellani, they are not edible at all. And they are in a certain, in the Leprosipis section. And the first poisonings with this fungus were only reported in 1952 from Poland, a mass poisoning with more than 100 people, and quite a few died. And the real puzzle to us mycologists is, why did it take so long to find out about this poison? People have collected mushrooms in Europe for at least for centuries, more likely for millennia. And why did they not come across that? And the most likely explanation is the very long incubation period of 3 to 21 days. So if you eat a mushroom, and in the extreme case, you have to wait 3 weeks, who would trace back their sickness to a mushroom meal that they had 3 weeks ago? And that probably explains why we took so long to find out about these things. Nicholas Evans is the British writer who wrote The Horse Whisperer, and he collected these mushrooms. He thought they were chanterelles. He did survive, and in an example of filial devotion, his daughter gave him one of her kidneys, and he is still writing books and bestsellers. If you haven't read The Horse Whisperer, it's a nice book. It actually plays in Montana. Orellanins are these toxins. They severely damage the renal tubuli in the kidneys. Yeah, so many times, if you had a good meal, you need a kidney transplantation or dialysis treatment. And, you know, headaches, frequent urination, thirst, gastrointestinal problems, and all these are the symptoms. But as I said, if you're lucky, you get them after half a week, but usually it takes at least a week until you get the symptoms. I should just mention that these guys are so bad that they have even found mention in books on biological warfare by the U.S. Army. So these nephrotoxins are actually mentioned there. And it's ironic that one of the biggest outbreaks that we had a few years ago in France, they were actually military personnel on a survival trip in the wilderness, and their manual told them to eat edible mushrooms, and they got the wrong ones. And those are the worst ones that they could get. Fly agaric, completely different toxins. You all have probably seen it. That's one of the most recognized mushroom anywhere in the northern hemisphere of the world. You have these white dots on the cap, you have the ring, you have these belts on the underside, and you have the swollen base, which you see on the little one here or here. That combination tells you that it is the fly agaric. I have to go quick with that one because I could talk all night about this one, but I just want to show you the two main toxins, that massimol on the left and ibotenic acid on the right. The symptoms usually occur after 30 minutes to 2 hours: delirium, nausea, vomiting, hallucinations, cramps, lack of coordination, and almost never fatal. So there's I'm not aware of any deadly fly agaric poisoning. Facts about fly agaric: it was widely used in Siberia for its mind-altering properties, and it seems that the Siberian fly mushrooms don't have the toxic effects. They have only the mind-altering effects. And also they have found several ways to eliminate the toxins. Siberian reindeer eagerly eat fly agarics as well. And the ibotenic acid remains unchanged in the urine and are consumed again. So you can see from that how important that is. So who is consuming them again? Is it the people or the reindeer? Well, it's actually both. So it's really valuable stuff. Gordon Wasson, which was the founder of ethnomycology, proposed Amanita muscaria as the source of the mysterious soma beverage, which was described in the ancient Rig Veda. This is probably the oldest written document, or one of the oldest written documents of humanity, 1500 before our current era. And he thinks that soma, that is a bone of contention for many scholars. He thinks it's Amanita muscaria. And Amanita muscaria has also been used to poison flies. Some people are saying that's where it got its name from, but that's controversial. I could tell you much more about fly agaric, but we have to cover a few other things. Fiber caps in Ossipee. Just go on the Musket Creek Trail here in Athabasca or anywhere in northern Alberta, you find plenty of these guys. They have that typical spermatic smell. which and many of them have this conical shape. A few years ago, a staff member of our AU of our university was just about to make a meal from those mixed with some other mushrooms, and she did show it to me before she made the meal, and fortunately I could tell her that I saved her a trip to the hospital. But however, they are not. The poison is not deadly, but it certainly can hospitalize you. Mascarin is the common toxin. You're probably wondering why mascarin, and we had Amanita muscaria before. In fact, it was thought when centuries earlier that mascarin is actually the defining poison of Amanita muscaria, of the fly agaric. It turned out it is not, and mascarin is almost only in traces in fly agaric, but it's very well distributed in many other mushrooms, and the fiber caps that I just showed you are one of them. That's the molecule, fairly simple molecule. As I said, not fatal unless you eat a huge meal. Typical symptoms: perspiration, salivation, lacrimation. That always goes hand in hand. Diarrhea, abdominal pain, and blurred vision. So you sweat, you salivate, and you cry when you have eaten those. Typically, incubation times are between a few minutes and half an hour. So whenever I hear people about mushroom poisoners, how long did it take? And they say, oh, it took only 10 minutes, only 20 minutes. I say, good news. You're not going to die, because that short incubation period is always good news. It's something like mascarin in many cases. On the more molecular cellular level, mascarin mimics the effect of a neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, in the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's why you get these perspiration, salivation symptoms. Another one is the false morel. This is a spring fungus. If you ever find in spring, that's probably one of the first fungi. And if you find a fungus that has this brain-shaped cap, that's our false morel, and they contain the toxin gyrometrin. The gyrometrin is very unstable, and when you eat that, it immediately is broken down into another product, which is then broken down into monomethylhydrazine. So that's really the toxin. And monomethylhydrazine is also rocket fuel. Since it is rocket fuel, and people in the aerospace industry have been exposed to monomethylhydrazine, we also know kind of how to treat the poisoning with the false morel. Incubation time is about 9 hours. Usually gastrointestinal symptoms, and many people have only that initial phase, and then they recover. However, if you have eaten too much, you get the second phase, and then your liver is in trouble, and you get jaundice, fever, delirium, coma, and liver damage. So if you make it, if you find the second phase is occurring, then you are in trouble. And so it's monomethylhydrazine, rocket fuel, and there was a piece of fake news circulating many years ago saying that NASA was actually culturing that fungus in order to create to harvest rocket fuel. Of course, that wasn't true. Finally, we have psilocybe species. We do have psilocybe in Alberta, in the surroundings of Athabasca, but it doesn't have any active substances. The active principles are psilocybin and psilocin, and they are commonly referred to as magic mushroom. If you want to find those, you have to go either to the mountains or to BC, where you find many of them. And this substance, because it's controversial whether you can call it a poison, so people might have different opinions on that, but they cause mind-altering experiences, euphoria, hallucinations, and visual distortions. The way they work is that, well, one of the ways, because there's still lots of research going on, they compete with the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain. When you eat them, this phosphate is immediately split off, and then they what the results is psilocin, and that's the active principle. High doses lead to periods of anxiety and panic, and there are promising candidates for psychiatric treatment. However, because they are illegal, it's such a pain in the neck as a researcher to work on these mushrooms. There's too much red tape, and so nobody really wants to go into that. But they are very promising. I want to conclude with heavy metals in mushroom. In 1986, the Chernobyl disaster released massive amounts of cesium. And so mushrooms that are normally well edible accumulated cesium and became inedible for many, many years. In fact, the half-life of cesium is such that by now about half of that radioactivity is still showing, because it's about 30 years, and that's the half-life of cesium. Many other mushrooms also have a remarkable capacity to accumulate heavy metals and other elements. Cadmium, mercury, selenium, gold, arsenic, many others. And then it becomes a problem if you live in an area where mining is going on. You have to be careful about what mushrooms you eat. Finally, mushroom poisonings can happen with edible mushrooms as well. I mentioned that for the heavy metals, but also with the amount of pesticide application that's going on, never collect from roadsides or agricultural areas where pesticides are used, because mushrooms accumulate the pesticides. They will eventually break them down, but at first they will accumulate them. And then you might think you are poisoned by the mushroom, but you are actually poisoned by the pesticide. And my suspicion is many poisonings with mushrooms are actually not the mushrooms, but pesticides. And also, don't ever eat raw mushrooms. I have the picture of the morel here, because that's a very good example of one of the best mushrooms that you can get for eating. If you eat it raw, you get serious problems. Acknowledgement. I really want to acknowledge all these people who provide open resources on the web. Not only open resources, but also software. So the presentation today was developed in LibreOffice on a Linux platform. Only open software and open resources have been used. And the reason I can do that is because thousands of people develop the software and upload material, upload photographs for all the world to use. So I really feel very strong about that, people doing a real service to the community. So if you have any good photographs, I would encourage you to do the same. And so, yeah, no corporate products have been used for this presentation. And the 50 minutes have come to a merciful end. Thank you. And I'll close here. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I stop sharing now. And
Are there any questions? I didn't notice any in the chat. You can type them in there still if you wish, but you can just ask.
Yeah,
Roland.
I have a question. This is Farouk. I have a question. Roland, I'd like to ask you about these mushroom circles or crescents that we see in our backyard. So how this is different from what you mentioned and why they take this shape in their spread?
Okay. I did not include those because they are completely opposite to what I was talking about today. In fact, when people often, this is one of the most common questions I get asked, basically, what can I do to kill these fairy rings in my lawn? My consistent answer is eat them. They are one of the best edible mushrooms. Just make sure that they are fresh. I use the caps only. And of course, if you use pesticides in your garden, don't eat them. But if you don't, if you have an organic garden, eat them. They are wonderful to eat, best in soups. I use only the caps. But finally, answering your question, what's happening is that when a new mycelium, usually through spores, they form spores and then a new mycelium is establishing itself. So that mycelium grows out from that initial establishment point and forms a little circle. And every year that mycelium grows out a little bit, out and out and out. And the fruit bodies only form on the growing margin of that mycelium. That's why you see that sometimes perfect circle shape, and the circles can be huge. They can be up to 50 meters, and sometimes they are interrupted. You will also find that they actually, on one hand, kill some of the grass. You have a zone where it kills the grass, and you have another zone where the grass is even greener because the grass gets more nutrients. We still don't know what's going on, but we do know that it has some antibiotics. Hopefully that answers your question. So what you really see is the border of the mycelium. And since we are talking about mythology and all that, we call them fairy rings because people were thinking that the fairies are actually dancing around, and that's what creates the fairy rings. And in Germany they are called witches rings. Same with witches or fairies. Who cares? Hopefully that answers the question.
And I could add that not only fresh, but you can dry the caps and keep them for the winter for soups as well. That's
what I'm saying, but be careful. You really wanna, I remember somebody getting a poisoning from those because they had old ones. This is one of the few mushrooms that actually persists for a long time. So these fruit bodies can persist for sometimes weeks, unlike most other mushrooms that just decay. So if you get an older one, you shouldn't take that. But if you see that they're just coming out, grab them, dry them, or put them in your soup.
So I should probably use a dryer instead of just letting them dry slowly.
You should.
Okay. So in the chat, Cheryl actually asks, the mushrooms you buy at the supermarket, do they have to be cooked before eating as well?
I would. I mean, and I'm speaking out of experience. I mean, when I was a kid, I was eating only raw mushrooms, but I had a different digestive system at that point. I had I had a severe poisoning from improperly cooked mushrooms, not the ones in the supermarket. So my answer would be try a small amount. If your system can handle it, fine. If not, don't increase the dose. So we are always doing these recommendations based on the greatest possible caution. And some people might be able to eat them, but in general, I would not recommend it. And if you do, try those first. Take just a few slices. If you're fine, then you can go up a bit higher.
Thank you. And Elston asks, the Galerina mushroom looks very similar to the Armillaria melia. Are there key differences, visual or habitat to watch for?
Yeah, the main thing that you should, well, there's several ones. The Galerina has a brown spore print. The Armillaria has a white spore print. Very often when you collect the honey mushroom, the Armillaria, you will find white powdered dust all over the place. Same for the Galerina, you will find the brown spores all over the place. If you don't find that, make a spore print. Takes about 1 or 2 hours, and then you see the color of the spores. Armillaria has white spores, Galerina has brown spores. And also the Armillaria has this kind of almost cottony flesh. When you break it open inside, it's kind of cottony. By the way, Armillaria is a very good example as well. Never eat that one raw. Armillaria is known to cause severe problems, gastrointestinal problems, when you eat it raw. So another good example.
David asks, to what extent the double cook technique would perhaps overcome all these different toxins? I'm not sure the double cook. David, do you want to explain?
Double cooking. No, in fact, the false morel, it's actually called Gyromitra esculenta, which means edible. A lot of Gyromitra esculenta has been eaten for decades. It has even been approved in many countries of Europe as an official market mushroom. And the common treatment for that was actually put it in boiling water, and that should remove the gyrometrin and the hydrazine, and then you're supposed to eat it. We no longer recommend that. So I would be very careful with double cooking. It does definitely not work for the majority of poisons that I was talking about today. Only exception being false morel, but I wouldn't take the risk.
Okay, and Mike McLean asks the simple question, where do you find morels in the Athabasca area? Do you supply a map on?
In fact, Mike was the person who kindly showed me a new hunting ground for morels. Thank you so much, Mike, and I will keep quiet about that.
Well, will either of you share that? No, okay. Another question from Carla. Should you leave the root when harvesting mushrooms? That is the mycelium, the bottom.
Yeah, it's a bit of a philosophical question. It has never been answered correctly. I would definitely take out everything that you can. The recommendation is that you actually turn it a little bit so that it goes out easier. The reason why I definitely recommend to take everything out is sometimes the bottom part may give away important characters. For example, for the death caps, if you miss that bottom part, you are in trouble. So unless you are really experienced, take out everything, just to be sure that you don't that you can identify the mushroom and can and that you can actually get the right a good ID.
Did I miss anyone's questions from chat? Except for the one about whether it's being recorded, and yes, it is, and it'll be available on our website. So you go to upcoming and past events, and of course, it will now be a past event. So once it's organized and Linda uploads it, it'll be available there. Any other questions?
Can I just conclude by, first of all, saying thank you to everyone who wasted their 50 minutes to listen to this, but also for those of you who haven't used that, I'm always happy to identify mushrooms that people bring in. I didn't get any, obviously, in 2020, but if you have things to identify, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to do that, and we don't charge anything.
Roland, there was a question from Danielle wondering if you can become ill by just touching a poisonous mushroom?
No, definitely not. You know, it's proper practice to wash hands afterwards, as you would when you touch raw meat or whatever else. But no, definitely not. Definitely not. The only thing that people sometimes get problems with is spores in the air. For example, the people who work in oyster mushroom cultivation units, they sometimes get allergies because they breathe in too many of the spores. So you want to avoid that. And coming back to one of my first points, the mycotoxins. So if you have moldy stuff, that indeed, while you don't inhale it, and wash your hands properly, because that's bad stuff. That could potentially be bad stuff. Still, if you don't breathe it in through the skin, definitely not.
Any other questions?
There was another comment here from Allison saying, I am pretty sure I have lots of turkey tail at my place. Can I eat these? Any tips for how to harvest them?
I want to see them first. If you can send me a photo and then I can advise more.
Any more questions from the audience? Well, before we miss our chance, let's all give Roland a great hand for such an excellent talk.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a bit weird to not see anybody, but that's my software. But it's not Windows, so I still wanna keep it. But
and do you have time for a few more questions, Roland?
Sorry?
Do you have time for a few more questions?
I should do.
Does anyone have more questions before I?
There was a comment here from Mike McLean asking, will there be a second presentation, a brief history on the uses of mushroom toxins by the CIA or other state security agencies? The dark side part 2?
It's in fact, it's not really funny, because we know that the CIA, and this is not just somebody's theory, we know that they have experimented with people with various toxins. Usually they do it with prison populations, and there's many established reports, but these things come only out after many decades when things are filed and the people responsible are no longer around. But so these things unfortunately do happen.
And I could add that there was a recent case of self-medication where a fellow made a tea out of magic mushrooms and injected it. And later he felt quite ill. And they found that the magic mushrooms were actually growing in his bloodstream because, of course, it's warm and damp and they don't require sunshine. So, so it took a lot of antifungals and stuff to clear him out. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah.
Harvey.
Hi, Dwayne. Hi, Wayne. This is Lisa Roland. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I know that you didn't talk about them. I'm curious to know, pigs are often used for searching out truffles, and you talked about truffles. How is it that pigs are trained to search out for truffles?
I take a little bit issue with your question because pigs are very hard to train. That's actually a problem. There's two possibilities. Some people are using pigs. Other people are using dogs. Now, the advantage of a dog is that, and you know, the ultimate reason is their sense of smell, which is just amazing for both pigs and dogs. But the pigs are still superior to dogs, and but the pig, when it gets the truffle, it eats it, and the dog, when it gets the truffle, it's actually you know, it's trained and it just digs it out, and you give it a treat, and you keep your $900 truffle for yourself, and the pig might actually eat it. But so that's why you know, you were asking how pigs are trained. They're only trained to some degree, and but if you want the best nose, you take a pig. But you might take into consideration that the pig eats some of a few $1,000s of your truffle. But part of the reason is the reason why truffles smell so strongly is that all these hypogeous fungus that grow underground, they are supposed to be eaten by usually rodents, not pigs, but by rodents. So all these fungi are eaten by rodents, and that's the way how they are spread. And that's the reason why they have this strong aroma that we like, and the pig likes, and the dog likes. Hope this answers your question, the first one.
Yeah, that's really great. And so can they distinguish a good mushroom or truffle from a bad mushroom?
The pigs, they go after pretty much everything. That's the way pigs are. By the way, it's good that you mentioned pigs, because pigs can eat the death caps without any problem. So the pigs don't really care a lot. The dogs, you can train to really find specific ones. And there's many different truffles, and the dogs, yes, indeed, you can train them to particular smells and particular species.
Oh, cool. I do have a second question. You mentioned that certain mushrooms cause damage to the liver, and other mushroom toxins cause damage to the kidney. What is the distinguishing features of both, and why is it focused on one organ and not the other?
Well, you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, because, for example, the death caps, in most cases, liver is the main target, because that's where all the metabolism. It's the center of the body's metabolism, and everything is going there. I should mention here that both the death caps that affect the liver and the say the web caps, the cortinarius that affect the kidneys, they also do the other organ. So it's not restricted to one organ. It's just the main target is either the kidney or the liver. And it has to do in the case of the kidney, you know, it's for example, if you damage the renal tubes of the kidney, of course you will affect the kidney more than the liver. But it doesn't mean that they don't affect the liver as well.
Great, thank you, Roland.
Thanks, Lisa.
So back to the truffle hunting. Mike McLean notes that it sounds like Orwell: pigs bad, dogs good.
I wouldn't say that because again, the pig would still find a few things that the dogs don't find. The only problem is it might eat the truffle themselves. So you have to make that.
Yeah, I think that's what he was implying, that the pigs will be more like humans and eat the truffles, right?
Yeah.
And the dogs probably would. Harvey Scott had a question. Do you still have it, Harvey?
Yeah, it's sort of a practical knowledge question, I guess. This was probably 40 years ago. I went out with an old neighbor who immigrant from Eastern Europe, and you know he'd been eating them for years, so he never killed himself. But and the one thing he did, sort of as a surefire test, Roland, was he had a little pocket knife, and he would cut into them, and if there were bugs or worms in them, that he said, well, it's safe to eat. Now that's sound kind of counterintuitive, and but anyway, I just wondered what you think of that approach.
Nothing at all. There's a whole list of telltale signs that people think. For example, many of you might have heard about the silver spoon you put in, and then if it turns black, it's good or bad. Or with the worms, that's another thing. I find the maggots in poisonous mushrooms. I find them in edible mushrooms, and I hate them for that. The metabolism of the insects is completely different from ours, and there's no conclusions possible at all. It could actually cost your life if you believe that.
I guess he was just lucky.
Yeah. I'm surprised because the people from Eastern Europe are the most knowledgeable. Everyone from Russia or from Ukraine or from Poland, everyone goes out collecting mushrooms. And so, but you know that bad poisoning that happened in Poland. So.
And in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic now, they have trains that go to the mountains for mushroom picking in the fall. So special trains for
and many European countries have now implemented restrictions. So it used to be everyone could collect mushrooms everywhere in Europe, and now there's many restrictions nowadays. So it's no longer like it used to be. You have to really first do your your homework and find out whether you're still allowed to collect, because there's so much commercial collecting going on nowadays.
Yeah, and a similar situation in BC, where a lot of the pine mushrooms that are prized in Japan are on reserve land, and people go and trespass, of course, because they're quite lucrative. Another question in chat from Heather Stocking. Sometimes I get a craving for a regular white mushroom. What would be in them to make me crave them? Is there some?
I cannot really relate to that, because the store-bought white mushroom would be that's something I would eat only in if I'm desperate and I don't get any other mushrooms. I can't really imagine what you have. You should try some others. I'm not aware of anything that would make you addictive. I find them pretty bland compared to what I get out in the woods. But so no, I cannot really answer the question. But I would never get the craving for those. I get the craving for many others.
So Heather responds that she guess she's just basic. So I have another question or comment. There's a book from a couple of decades ago, I think, called The Magic Mushroom and the Cross, but they called the muscaria the magic mushroom rather than the
it's not the magic mushroom. It's
just the mushroom.
It's the sacred mushroom.
Oh, sacred mushroom. Okay.
And and the cross. And I didn't want to mention that because it might actually offend some people, because it's basically, I'm trying to express this very neutral. Basically, the thesis of this book is that the Christian religion is based on a mushroom cult, and the mushroom cult at the base of that religion is actually Amanita muscaria, and it also involves some phallic symbols, and that's all I wanna say now. So that's why I didn't really. There's many books written about Amanita muscaria. I could talk the whole night about that. I'm also interested in that because there's so many things that we still don't know about that mushroom.
Any more questions? Are we?
Roland, there was somebody asking about if they have pictures, where they should send them to. Do you want them to?
I gave her, Allison, his email address. So she responds, "Thank you for the excellent presentation, very informative. I really appreciate your offering to identify my turkey tail. We'll find and send a picture. If I can't find a picture, I might have to wait until the snow goes away."
Yes.
So
and,
she'll get in contact with you.
And maybe if you can, you could simply write my email address in the chat box.
I did that.
Oh, okay.
So she's set. Okay, if that's all the questions, maybe another round of applause because it was a double applause type of talk.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome, thank you. And Roland, just so you know, we had 92 people at one point in time, so.
Oh, that's not bad.
That's excellent, so.
Okay, it's over to you, Linda, to finish off. I guess we don't have any drawings for prizes, eh?
No. Thanks everyone for attending today, and hopefully we'll see you all on February 23rd for Robert Holmberg's talk on crustaceans more than lobsters, crabs, and shrimps. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Ronald.
Everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.